She didn't even look at me as she typed, her voice colder than winter. "You'll die poor. I'm taking everything." In one brutal week, I lost my wife, my daughter, and the home I'd built with my own hands. I remember sitting on the floor, surrounded by boxes, wondering how I'd ever start over. That's when the letter from the Pentagon landed in my mailbox. A letter that would change everything. Suddenly, I was staring at a $129 million inheritance and a chance to turn her betrayal into the ultimate family revenge. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. I remember the exact moment my world began to unravel. The sun was setting behind Thessaly, casting a golden and crimson glow that painted the windows of our penthouse in gold and crimson. My wife, Julia, stood by the kitchen island, swirling a glass of red wine, her eyes fixed on her phone. I'd always trusted her with my heart, my secrets, and every dollar I'd ever earned. We'd built a life together, or so I thought. Our marriage was the kind people envied. Elegant parties, laughter echoing through marble halls, vacations in places most people only saw in magazines. But beneath the surface, cracks had started to form. Cracks I'd ignored, believing love could fill them. Julia was magnetic. She could light up a room with her smile, and she knew it. I was the quiet one, the steady hand behind her shine. I worked long hours as a financial analyst, climbing the corporate ladder so she could pursue her dreams first as an artist, then as a designer, and finally as a socialite. I never questioned the late-night texts, the sudden trips, the new friends with old money. I wanted to believe we were a team, that our love was unbreakable. Our daughter, Emily, was the glue that held us together. She was 12, with my eyes and Julia's fire. Every night, I'd tuck her in and promise her that no matter what happened, her family would always be there. I meant it. I thought Julia did too, but trust, I learned, is a fragile thing. It can shatter in an instant, leaving only sharp edges and memories. The first real sign came on a rainy Thursday. Julia was late coming home again. I called her, but she didn't answer. When she finally walked through the door, her hair was damp, her eyes distant. She barely looked at me as she set her purse down and disappeared into the bedroom. I told myself she was tired, stressed, maybe even a little lost. I didn't want to see the truth. That night, as I lay awake listening to the storm, I heard her whispering on the phone. Her voice was low, urgent, laced with a tenderness I hadn't heard in months. I wanted to believe she was talking to her sister, or maybe her mother. But deep down, I knew. I just didn't want to admit it. The next morning, I found her phone on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with a message from a name I didn't recognize. "Last night was perfect. Can't wait to see you again." My hands shook as I scrolled through the thread photos, inside jokes, plans for weekends I thought she'd spent with friends. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a hammer blow of betrayal. I confronted her that evening, my voice trembling. "Who is he, Julia?" She didn't deny it. She didn't even look surprised. "You work too much," she said, her tone icy. "You're never here. I need someone who actually sees me." Her words cut deeper than any knife. I tried to reason with her, to remind her of everything we'd built, but she was already gone, her body in our home, her heart somewhere else. Emily sensed the tension. She stopped asking for family dinners, started spending more time in her room, headphones on, shutting out the world. I tried to hold it together for her, but every day felt like walking on broken glass. Julia moved through the house like a ghost, her laughter reserved for someone else. I thought things couldn't get worse. I was wrong. The betrayal was just beginning. The day Julia's betrayal became undeniable was the day I lost everything I thought I could count on. It started with a text, a single venomous message that would echo in my mind for months to come. I was at work, hunched over spreadsheets, when my phone buzzed. I glanced down, expecting a reminder or maybe a message from Emily. Instead, I saw Julia's name and a preview that made my blood run cold. "You'll die poor." I opened the message, my hands trembling. The words were even colder than I'd imagined. "You'll die poor. I hope you enjoy your new life in that shoebox apartment. I'm keeping the house, the car, and Emily. You have nothing left. Don't bother fighting it." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to call her, but she didn't answer. Instead, I got a call from my lawyer. "She's filed for divorce," he said, his voice heavy. "She's asking for full custody and the house. She's also freezing the joint accounts." It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I rushed home, desperate to see Emily, to make sense of what was happening. But when I arrived, the locks had been changed. My key didn't fit. I pounded on the door, calling Julia's name, but she never answered. Through the window, I saw her silhouette moving through the living room, her phone pressed to her ear, her laughter sharp and cruel. I spent that night in my car, parked outside the house I'd worked my whole life to provide. Rain tapped against the windshield, each drop a reminder of everything I'd lost. I called Emily, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I left message after message, my voice breaking, begging her to call me back. She never did. The next morning, I went to the bank, hoping to withdraw enough money to get by. The teller looked at me with pity, as she explained that the accounts were frozen pending the divorce. I had $47 in my wallet and nowhere to go. My friends offered couches, but I couldn't face their questions, their pity. I rented a tiny studio apartment on the edge of town, the kind of place I'd lived in during college. The walls were thin, the air smelled of mildew, and the only furniture was a mattress on the floor. Julia's texts kept coming. Each one was a fresh wound. "Roland says you never deserved me. He's moving in next week. Emily loves him. She calls him Dad now." I wanted to scream, to break something, to make her feel the pain she was inflicting. But I was powerless. She had the house, the money, and my daughter. All I had were memories and regrets. I tried to fight back in court, but Julia's lawyer was ruthless. He painted me as an absent father, a workaholic who'd neglected his family. Julia sat in the courtroom, her eyes cold, her lips curled in a satisfied smile. Emily wouldn't even look at me. The judge awarded Julia full custody, the house, and most of our savings. I was left with a battered car, a few boxes of clothes, and my violin, the only thing she hadn't wanted. The final blow came when I received the official divorce decree. 20 years of marriage, reduced to a few sheets of paper and a text message. "You'll die poor." I sat on the floor of my empty apartment, the decree in one hand, my phone in the other, and wondered how it had all gone so wrong. But as I stared at the ceiling, numb with grief, I realized something. Julia thought she'd won. She thought she'd taken everything, but she didn't know about the letter I'd received that morning. A letter that would change everything and set in motion a revenge she could never have imagined. The letter arrived in a plain white envelope, tucked between bills and junk mail, almost as if it didn't want to be noticed. There was no return address, just my name, written in a careful, unfamiliar hand. I almost threw it away, thinking it was another debt collector or a final notice from the utility company. But something about the weight of the envelope made me pause. It was heavier than it should have been, as if it carried more than just paper. I sat on the edge of my mattress, the city's noise filtering through the cracked window, and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of thick, cream-colored paper, embossed with a government seal. My heart skipped a beat as I read the words at the top. Department of Defense Estate Recovery Division. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake, some bureaucratic error. But as I read on, my hands began to shake. Dear Mr. Carter, we are contacting you regarding the estate of your late grandfather, Staff Sergeant William Carter. Please call the number below at your earliest convenience. This matter is both urgent and confidential. My grandfather. I hadn't thought about him in years. He died when I was a teenager, leaving behind a few faded photographs and a battered journal filled with cryptic notes and musical notations. My father had always said Grandpa William was a complicated man, a war hero with secrets he'd taken to the grave. I'd never understood what that meant until now. I dialed the number, my heart pounding. After a few rings, a crisp, authoritative voice answered. Mr. Carter, this is Colonel James Whitmore with the Pentagon's Estate Recovery Division. I need you to listen very carefully. The next 10 minutes changed everything I thought I knew about my family and about myself. Colonel Whitmore explained that my grandfather had been involved in a classified operation during the Vietnam War, something called Operation Night Music. For For decades, the details had been buried, locked away in government vaults. But now, with the declassification of certain files, the truth was finally coming to light. "Your grandfather was owed compensation for his service," Whitmore said. "Due to the classified nature of his mission, those funds were never released. With interest and adjustments for inflation, the total amount now stands at $129 million. The funds are being held in trust, pending your verification as the sole heir." I nearly dropped the phone. $129 million? It sounded like a cruel joke, a fantasy conjured by a desperate mind. But Whitmore's tone was deadly serious. "There are conditions," he continued. "You must come to Washington, D.C. within 72 hours to claim the inheritance. If you fail to do so, the funds will revert to the Department of Defense." I sat in stunned silence, the phone pressed to my ear. My mind raced with questions, doubts, and a flicker of hope I hadn't felt in months. Julia's words echoed in my head. "You'll die poorer." And for the first time since she'd left, I felt something other than despair. I felt anger. I felt resolved. Julia had taken everything from me. She'd humiliated me, stolen my daughter, and left me with nothing. But now, fate had handed me a weapon, a chance to reclaim my life, and to show her that I was not the broken man she believed me to be. I packed a small bag, grabbed my grandfather's journal, and booked the first flight to Washington. As the plane lifted off, I stared out the window at the city shrinking below, my mind racing with possibilities. I didn't know what awaited me in D.C., but I knew one thing: I was done being a victim. Julia thought she'd won, but she had no idea what was coming. This wasn't just about money. It was about justice. It was about revenge. And I was ready to fight for both. The flight to Washington felt like a journey through another life. I barely slept, my mind replaying every moment of betrayal, every cruel word Julia had thrown at me. I clutched my grandfather's journal like a lifeline, flipping through its pages as if the answers to everything were hidden in his looping script and cryptic musical notes. The city lights below faded into darkness, and I made a silent promise to myself. I would not let Julia's betrayal define me. I would not let her win. When I landed at Reagan National, a black sedan was waiting at the curb, just as Colonel Whitmore had promised. The driver, a stone-faced man in a dark suit, greeted me by name and handed me a sealed envelope. "For your eyes only," he said, his voice clipped and professional. Inside was a visitor's badge and a single sheet of instructions. "Report to the Pentagon, room 417B, 0800 hours. Bring the journal." The Pentagon was a fortress of secrets, its corridors echoing with the footsteps of men and women who carried the weight of the world on their shoulders. I was escorted through a maze of security checkpoints, my heart pounding with every step. Finally, I was ushered into a small, windowless room where Colonel Whitmore waited, his uniform immaculate, his eyes sharp and assessing. "Mr. Carter," he said, rising to shake my hand. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. Please, have a seat." He wasted no time. "Your grandfather was a remarkable man. What he did for this country will never be fully known, but his sacrifice was extraordinary. The funds he was owed have been held in trust for decades, accruing interest. You are the sole beneficiary." He slid a thick folder across the table. Inside were documents, bank statements, legal forms, and letters from government officials. It was all real. The money was real. My hands shook as I signed the final page, officially claiming the inheritance. But Whitmore wasn't finished. "There's something else," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Your grandfather left instructions. He wanted you to have this." He handed me a small, battered key and a slip of paper with an address in Baltimore. He said you'd know what to do. I left the Pentagon in a daze, the weight of my new reality pressing down on me. $129 million. It was more money than I could comprehend. But as I stared at the key in my hand, I realized this was about more than wealth. It was about legacy. It was about righting old wrongs. On the train to Baltimore, I began to piece together a plan. Julia had taken everything from me, but now I had the means to turn the tables. I would use the inheritance not just to rebuild my life, but to expose her lies, reclaim my daughter, and ensure she faced the consequences of her betrayal. First, I needed to secure the funds. I met with a team of lawyers and financial advisors, all sworn to secrecy. We set up trusts, shell companies, and ironclad legal protections. Julia would never see a dime unless I wanted her to. I made sure of it. Next, I turned my attention to the house. Julia had fought tooth and nail to keep it, flaunting her victory at every opportunity. But she didn't know that the mortgage was still in my name, and that she'd missed several payments in her rush to redecorate and impress her new lover. With the right legal maneuvering and a little help from my new team, I could force a foreclosure. It would be public, humiliating, and irreversible. But I wasn't done. I hired a private investigator to dig into Julia's finances, her relationship with Roland, and every secret she thought she'd buried. What he found was worse than I'd imagined: hidden accounts, fraudulent transactions, and evidence of an affair that had started long before our marriage ended. I gathered everything into a dossier, each page a nail in the coffin of her new life. The final piece of the plan was Emily. I knew she was hurting, caught between two parents at war. I couldn't force her to choose me, but I could show her the truth. I started writing her letters honestly, heartfelt, and raw. I told her about the inheritance, about her great-grandfather's legacy, about the mistakes I'd made and the lessons I'd learned. I promised her that no matter what happened, I would always fight for her. As the days passed, the pieces fell into place. The foreclosure notice was served. Julia's accounts were frozen pending investigation. Roland's reputation was in tatters, his business deals unraveling as the truth came to light. And Emile, my sweet, brave Emmy, life finally called me. Her voice was shaky, but there was hope in it. "Dad, can we talk?" I knew then that the tide had turned. Julia thought she could destroy me, but she'd only made me stronger. The revenge was just beginning, and the cost would be more than she could ever imagine. The day the foreclosure notice was posted on the front door of our old house, Julia's world began to collapse. I watched from my car across the street, hidden behind tinted windows, as she stormed outside in her silk robe, her face twisted in disbelief. She tore the paper from the door, scanning the legal jargon, her hands shaking. I could almost hear her shriek echoing through the neighborhood. For years, she'd paraded her victory, hosting parties, showing off the house, pretending she'd built this life on her own. Now, the neighbors she'd tried so hard to impress watched as her empire crumbled. But that was only the beginning. The investigator's dossier was airtight. I sent copies to Julia's attorney, the family court, and Roland's business partners. The evidence of fraud, hidden assets, and the timeline of her affair with Roland was impossible to ignore. The court reopened our custody case. Julia's lawyer, the same man she'd once called a family friend, dropped her as a client within days. Roland tried to play damage control, but the scandal spread like wildfire. His company's board demanded answers. Investors pulled out. The media caught wind of the story: prominent businessman implicated in divorce scandal and financial fraud. His face was splashed across the news, his reputation in ruins. Julia's social circle evaporated overnight. The women who'd once envied her now whispered behind her back, eager to distance themselves from the fallout. Meanwhile, I moved quickly. With the inheritance secured, I bought the house at auction under a trust, ensuring Julia would never know I was the new owner. I arranged for my aunt and uncle, who'd lost their home to medical bills, to move in. The house, that had been a symbol of Julia's triumph, was now a sanctuary for the family she'd always looked down on. But the most important battle was for Emily. The court ordered a new custody evaluation. This time, the truth was on my side. The judge read the investigator's report, the letters I'd written to Emily, and the evidence of Julia's manipulation. Emily, brave beyond her years, told the court she wanted to live with me. She said she missed the father who'd always been there, even when he had nothing. The judge granted me primary custody, and for the first time in months, I felt hope bloom in my chest. Julia tried to fight back, but every move she made only dug her deeper. Her accounts were frozen, her credit destroyed, her name synonymous with scandal. She called me sobbing, begging for help. "Please, I have nothing left. I made a mistake. I just want my life back." I listened in silence, remembering every cruel word, every lie, every moment she'd tried to break me. "You chose this, Julia," I said quietly. "Now you have to live with it." The final blow came when Roland was indicted for fraud and embezzlement. The evidence I'd provided was the linchpin in the case. He was arrested in front of his office, cameras flashing, his empire collapsing in real time. Julia was left alone, her dreams of wealth and status reduced to ashes. I stood in the empty living room of my new home, sunlight streaming through the windows, Emily's laughter echoing down the hall. The revenge was complete. Julia had thought she could destroy me, but in the end, she'd only destroyed herself. I'd reclaimed my life, my daughter, and my dignity. And as I looked around at the family I'd saved, I knew that justice had finally been served. But even as the dust settled, I couldn't shake the feeling that the true victory wasn't in Julia's downfall, but in the life I'd rebuilt from the ruins. The inheritance was a gift, but the real treasure was the strength I'd found in myself, and the love I'd reclaimed with Emily by my side. Still, there was one more secret left to uncover. My grandfather's journal, the key to everything, held one final message, a truth that would change the way I saw my family forever. The weeks that followed felt like waking up from a long, bitter dream. The city was the same, but I was not. I moved into a modest but warm home with Emily, just a few blocks from her school. The first night, she helped me unpack boxes, her laughter filling the rooms that had once echoed with silence. We hung her drawings on the fridge, cooked spaghetti together, and watched old movies on the couch. For the first time in years, I felt peace settle over me. A quiet, steady kind of happiness that didn't depend on money or status. Julia, meanwhile, was living in a small apartment on the edge of town, her name blacklisted from every social circle she'd once ruled. The friends who'd flocked to her parties now crossed the street to avoid her. She called a few more times, her voice raw with regret, but I didn't answer. I'd spent too long letting her words define me. Now, I was free. The inheritance changed everything, but not in the way I'd expected. I set up a trust for Emily's future, paid off my aunt and uncle's medical debts, and donated to organizations that helped families torn apart by betrayal and toxic relationships. I even started a scholarship in my grandfather's name for children of veterans, an act of justice that felt like a small repayment for the secrets he'd carried. But the greatest gift was the journal. One evening, after Emily had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table and opened it again. I traced my grandfather's handwriting, the musical notations, the coded messages. On the last page, in faded ink, he'd written, "True inheritance is not measured in dollars, but in the courage to do what's right when everything else is lost." I realized then that my revenge hadn't just been about payback. It was about reclaiming my story, my dignity, and my family's legacy. Julia's betrayal had nearly destroyed me, but it had also forced me to become the man I was meant to be. A father Emily could be proud of, a son who honored his grandfather's memory, and a survivor who turned pain into purpose. The news of Roland's conviction made headlines for weeks. Ashford Industries collapsed, and the families he'd defrauded finally saw justice. Julia's name faded from the gossip columns, replaced by stories of resilience and redemption. Emily thrived in her new life, her laughter brighter, her eyes clearer. She told me once, as we walked by the lake, "Dad, I'm glad you never gave up on me, or on yourself." Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit by the window and think about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the loss, the revenge, and the unexpected inheritance that had changed the course of our lives. I'd remember the text Julia sent, "You'll die poor," and smile, not out of spite, but out of gratitude. Because in losing everything, I'd found what truly mattered. If you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever felt like your world was ending, know this: justice has a way of finding its mark. Karma may take its time, but it always arrives. And sometimes, the greatest revenge is simply living well, loving deeply, and refusing to let anyone else write your ending. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button, subscribe, and share your own story of family drama or redemption in the comments below. You never know who might need to hear it.